All right. The next item on the agenda is the Shellmound Design Guidelines.
Thank you and good evening. I'm Michelle de Guzman. I'm with the Economic Development and Housing Department. This is actually an item that has been continued from the January 26th Planning Commission meeting. So we will be brief, but we're going to recap the guidelines a bit and let you know how we've made changes since January as well and what activities we've undertaken. Just as a quick overview, the design guidelines are for a streetscape for a project area of Shellmound Street between 64th and Christie Avenue. It is envisioned as a retail district, and as such, it is anchored by Bay Street and the public market projects. The goal is to create an urban district through streetscape improvements and design recommendations to enhance the pedestrian experience and support the commercial activities in that area. The uses for the guidelines will be an amendment to the Emeryville Design Guidelines, as Charlie just mentioned, to be essentially an area plan. It will be implemented as projects are redeveloped and where a nexus exists with that redevelopment, and would be applicable to either design review applications or capital improvement projects through the CIP. Just some background, we started this back in 2005. We put it on hold due to the fact that there was some activity related to Bay Street and the public market, and we wanted to improve particularly the area underneath the Powell Street Bridge. And we later expanded it to both sides of Shellmound Street and to cover the area that I described earlier. The project was put on hold in 2007 to allow for development of site planning for the public market and Site B projects. Also because we were having very complex and not fruitful discussions with the ownership of the former Woodfin Suites property, and also there was an economic slowdown, so the drive to really get them in place was not as urgent given other constraints we were experiencing. However, we're ready to move forward now because there's been some improvements in the economy, which we're very excited about. There's evidence of new investment in the area. The purchase of the former Woodfin Hotel by Hyatt, and I apologize ahead of time if I call Hyatt Woodfin, and the Wells Fargo property, which is moving forward as well. And also we want to update the plans, or we have updated the plans to address the most likely development scenarios for both the public market and Bay Street, given the approval of a PUD for the public market and the Site B project hopefully moving forward. Just a little background on what we've done in terms of getting review and input on this. It's been a long project, so there's been a lot of input. We started with initial meetings before we had anything with just Bay Street and Madison before we really expanded the project. Over time, we've met with all of the property owners that are within the project area. We've gone to the community twice with community meetings, as well as we've gone to the BPAC and the Public Art Committee. And we've come to you 3 times. Well, this is the 4th time. So we're hoping the 4th time is a charm. At the January 2012 public hearing, we were given direction to continue the item so that there was additional time for the property owners to review and comment on the draft document, to hold a community meeting, as well as to solicit additional comment and feedback from city staff, all of which activities we have completed since the January meeting. We had a community meeting on May 31st where we presented the major elements of the plan. It was generally felt that the members of the community were supportive of the guidelines and supportive of the goals of the guidelines. TMG Partners, who is the owner of the public market project and really probably encompasses about 2/3 of the project area, presented a near-term solution to create a more visually active and aesthetically pleasing environment, which consisted of really addressing the areas under the Powell Street Bridge and in front of the hotel through new planting treatments and a public art concept. We feel that this concept that was put forth was a pretty great idea and would help actually to support something that can be done in the near term given the long-term outlook of implementing the guidelines, although the purpose of the guidelines is really to address the deficiencies in the public infrastructure that currently exist. This is a bit of a long slide, but I'll go through it anyway since it's the meat of what's occurred since January. Given all of the discussions, we had several additional one-on-one meetings with the property owners, as well as input we received at the community meeting and from staff. And we made more revisions to the document to make it more specific to the complexities of the site conditions, to allow greater flexibility, also to address market conditions, because obviously the market, being a retail area, the market is very sensitive in this area, and we want to make sure that the design guidelines support our pedestrian goals, but also meet the other goal of supporting the commercial activities in the area. And we also wanted to better achieve the goals of the general plan. So one of the things was that private property owners wanted to have additional flexibility in terms of the streetscape. So we made it clear that if they wanted to do a higher standard than what's put in the guidelines, they're certainly welcome to do so. However, they'll have to maintain those privately as well. The standards that are in the guidelines are ones that city staff feels are able to be maintained with the city's resources. The street tree section was revised again to reflect the site conditions, particularly issues with a high saline water table and contamination at the site, as well as being sensitive to the visibility of ground floor retail signage. Lighting should be dark sky compliant. This is being in line with our general plan. Existing master sign programs would take precedence. And there was a renewed emphasis on the Powell Street Bridge and the environment around there, particularly underneath the bridge, and creating that link between the Bay Street project and the public market project. We've looked at a potential mid-block crossing. That was one of the things that was actually brought up by one of the developers, that this was a pedestrian plan, and the span between Shellmound Way and Christie is so long, and there's no pedestrian crossings there. So we have looked at a potential for a mid-block crossing in that area. The exact location would be subject to traffic analysis and also the adjacent site development to make sure that that mid-block crossing worked with how those sites were redeveloped, as well as also recommended by one of the developers, putting in an on-street parking option on a portion of Shellmound Way between Shellmound Street between Christie and Shellmound. Again, this would be requested by the developer as part of the redevelopment of the adjacent property, and this would also be based upon feasibility with traffic impact and compatibility with the proposed project. If you have questions about that last item, I ask you to hold them because my WRTR consultant is here, and we'll go over that in a little bit more detail in this presentation. With that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce John Gibbs, who is with WRT and was our consultant in developing the guidelines.
Okay. Thank you, Commission. It's great to be back here. I think this is an exciting culmination of a lot of work, and a lot of work just in the last couple of months since we were last here in refining these documents and refining the plan and the guidelines and making it, I think, more successful for the development community, still retaining all the important pedestrian aspects for this plan. I think it's really exciting how it's moving forward. There was a lot of good ideas that were brought forward recently, and we've been able to incorporate the best of those. So I'm going to go through the presentation. Obviously, I'm not going to go page by page through the plan, so this is really a summary, and it gets at the highlights and the intent of these guidelines, especially for our public audience, because I know you guys have heard this before. So the project area is primarily focusing on Shellmound Street, really from the existing Bay Street up to 64th Street to the north. And really largely encompassing the environs of Bay Street currently, and as it proposes to expand northward to Site B, the Powell Street Bridge underpass environments, the Hyatt Hotel, and up through the public market. I'm going to go back here. The point here is that we recognize this area is changing in Emeryville. We recognize there's new housing units that are brought in. We recognize the great number of folks that are shopping at both the public market and Bay Street, at future other development sites in this district. And how might one be able to walk from one to the other? How might a person, a resident who lives in this neighborhood, be able to go out for a walk in the evening? And how is this really start to be defined as this great shopping district, largely and primarily directed towards regional retail? It's an important function here, but also respecting the fact that those folks need to be able to walk, that there's a greater identity to be gained, and the fact that there's greater number of residential dwellers in this area that just want to go out for a walk. And those folks attended our community meeting and said the same thing. So major developments being public market, Bay Street, the plan really recognizes the great contributions that these public environments are making, saying, yes, this is great, let's expand this, let's draw from the best of this and bring that out into the public realm. Certainly as other properties begin to develop and change over time, we want them to reflect this level of quality and perhaps even more. The general plan has been, I think, a great background document for this study. It certainly paved the way for kind of this level of concepts and really primed the community to start thinking a little differently about their public environment and about the town. The general plan is saying, you know, many of the same things that this plan is doing, and we've taken these sorts of ideas of walkability from the specificity of the dimension and the clear space to walk down the street, to the level of activity, the kind of planted environment, the sense of place. These things are then distilled and made more specific to the Shellmound district and Shellmound Street. So let's take a little look at the existing conditions and remind ourselves why we're doing this. If there was any doubt, this is the new bus stop after the building had been demolished. This is the new bus stop there in front of the temporary police station as you approach Powell Street. The sidewalk then really sort of stops and you kind of wander across the Powell Street Bridge underpass environment to get over to the other side. How might we be able to rebuild sidewalks so in a continuous fashion, not be interrupted by driveways and by these sorts of curb cuts? How can we establish quality transit facilities and appropriate waiting areas in order to encourage that use? How might we better treat this environment, both in terms of its character, the quality, the kinds of activities that can occur here, and very importantly, how do we connect from Shellmound Street all the way to the back here and to the pedestrian overpass? There's a set of stairs that drops down as you cross over from the tracks if you're heading west from Hollis. You have to get through this environment between the fencing in the underpass and the hotel parking lot. How can we turn this into a real robust and clear pedestrian environment? We'll show concepts associated with that. Here in front of the Woodfin Hotel, the sidewalk's about 5, maybe 6 feet, and interrupted in a few spots by light poles and signs and things like that. We want to widen these sidewalks. We want to bring about a more robust pedestrian environment. Other areas farther to the north where cars are overhanging, there's trees that are crammed into this very small sidewalk. This is not the kind of environment that we want to continue with. So the guidelines then set out to address issues of sidewalks, the quality of the sidewalk, down, as well as the dimension of those sidewalks and the things that occur within them, to plazas and public spaces, be them within private property where we're not really regulating as much, to the public environment, the potential for plaza underneath the Powell Street Bridge. And finally, providing some guidance to facades, really not trying to prescribe or overly prescribe the private environment, but to say that the success of the public realm really does depend upon the interface with the private realm. And there are strategies that you can implement, and as buildings begin to develop, that they can be implemented in a way that make a very successful public environment, be it an active use, be it transparency, be it locations of doorways, being it bringing those buildings up to the sidewalk. So some of the functional zones of the sidewalk, it's really broken it down. We get very scientific in the plan in terms of how the sidewalk is broken down. From the main pedestrian zone, which is that clear zone down the middle as an 8-foot clear zone, to the public amenity zone between the sidewalk and the curb where lights, street lights occur, benches, planting areas, these sorts of amenities, to the zone, what we call the frontage zone, and the interface between the sidewalk area and the front of the building. There's enough space for planter pots or displays being pulled outside of a building, to cafe tables and things like that. Different ways of encouraging retail, but activating and enlivening the public environment. It's interesting, we have a number of Walnut Creek examples here, which is another destination retail environment. So these strategies are familiar to us from a retail perspective, but also from pretty good town building environments as well. More detail about the pedestrian zones in terms of maximizing the amount of clear space, making sure that there's a clear zone to be able to move through the sidewalk. Interesting things happening on both sides of you. To the public amenity zone where the planter pots are and tree plantings, etc. This is an example from Bay Street. To that frontage zone where there's just enough space for cafe tables, etc. The plan identifies strategies for paving using enhanced paving and colored concrete, something that might tie into the new paving at the public market, and creating an attractive and legible, cohesive environment for the pedestrian. There's strategies also to implement special textures and elements of art within the paving as an element that is repeated along the street corridor, something that might tell the story of ecology or the history of the town engraved into the paving. Street furnishings are not fully determined as part of this plan, but instead it's a quality bar that has been set, and these are, in some cases, borrow from the city's standard standard street furnishings. In some cases, it's an expansion, and some new ones that are identified that are of a little higher quality and make this district perhaps just a little bit more unique. If this is a more higher quality retail environment, maybe we don't use the most basic streetscape bench that might be appropriate in other parts of the city. This also recognizes that there's publicly provided furnishings and amenities, but also privately provided furnishings and amenities, such as the elements of art, the signage, tables and chairs like what we have at Public Market, to the planter pots from Bay Street. The idea that these are very compatible with the public realm and are encouraged to help activate the public realm. Transit stops are identified in particular. There's exciting examples from other cities in downtown Portland on the right to a more standard fare. This is in Palo Alto, and Emeryville has its own standards and different art components to those. Bicycle facilities as well along the street corridor in terms of parking and the lanes that are already on the street. Planting, this is an area that's still encouraged, but there's definitely been some modifications in order to better recognize the constraints to planting trees in the ground along Shellmound. But a strong street tree canopy is still encouraged. Public art, this area has been strengthened in the plan, the idea of incorporating both really interesting and iconic sculptural elements that are an attraction unto themselves. That's kind of one strategy. Another strategy, such as been implemented in Syracuse, is functional elements, benches, tree grates, paving, these sorts of things that need to occur anyway along the street corridor, but can be done so by an artist or in collaboration with an artist. As the example here, it's a landscape architect and an artist that teamed up to create this sort of scene. This may not be our aesthetic, but it's a good example for how this city might move forward. To other sorts of things that start to lend themselves to some of these specific environments along the Shellmound Street. The underpass area, one of these, and unfortunately I don't, actually this is an example in Toronto on the left. This is a a dynamic light show that the sound and the vibration on the bridge translates to a light pattern on the underside. Example. There's a great example of murals from Florida, but our local here, city of Richmond, and the John Worley murals in that city are another great way to enliven these sorts of spaces and are encouraged by the plan. I'm going to show just a little bit more example diving into the Powell Street Bridge underpass area. So focusing in here from the existing condition to really what's proposed. And somewhere here there was a, let's see, oh yeah, there we go. To use this like somebody said how I should best do this, right? Here we go. So what's proposed, the black dots are the existing columns. So there's essentially 2 bays that move through. We've identified one of these bays to be at about 22 feet wide, to be an entire pedestrian zone passage all the way to the back where the stairs touch down from the pedestrian overpass. And all the way out to the street. You'll also see that the sidewalk is connected completely across, and that any vehicle access that moves through here does so by a normal driveway type of a treatment, as opposed to the curbs that are installed currently. We recognize that Bay Street may really require and benefit from vehicular access through this area, and the plan says that that actually can be a good thing. That these sorts of environments are not well populated. There's not that many people that are moving through here. And the idea of allowing this amount of activation of cars just moving in and out of the retail space is actually a really good thing of bringing more people, more eyes, and more activation. I think that it helps fund this and claims this space just a little bit more so that we can start to do some really fun things. The idea of treating the entire bridge as a mural and as an art piece. This could be a commissioned element where you you solicit ideas and you select one, you move forward with an artist to really transform the character of the bridge. And I think, as somebody had said, the bridge is really this division within the district. The idea that it could really be the center and the unifying element of the Shellmound district. This also starts to show the pedestrian lighting treatments that we can start to place along that walkway. This is a car in the foreground in the drive aisle and a pedestrian bicyclist in the background in the pedestrian walkway. So then the kinds of activities that we can begin to create, the kind of environment from dynamic lighting shows. This could be a space for markets. There's all sorts of examples throughout our country for interesting things that happen. This is an example from Boston. This is another example, Florida. This one, I believe, happens to be Portugal. This was a pretty exciting moment in our last public meeting when we started to talk about these things. People really gravitated towards these ideas. The illustrative plans that are in the appendix of the document show a potential outcome. So if these guidelines were applied in a certain way, it might start to look something like this. And I think, just a few highlights to point out are the continuous sidewalks where there are existing driveways, that these are continuous, where there's an existing curb cut. This just becomes a normal driveway on both sides of the street heading into the Hyatt as well. New entry plaza here at the Hyatt Hotel, a widened sidewalk, which I'll show in just a moment. The widened sidewalks all the way down along the frontage of Site B and on the west side of the street in front of the proposed Wells Fargo Hotel and any future conditions at the Four Points Hotel. In section, what that starts to look like, you have the front of a building, you have planter pots, you have an 8-foot pedestrian zone, overall 16-foot typical sidewalk treatment. Perhaps on the other side of the street, there's an adjacent plaza, but you're maintaining your public access along the street and allowing all the great things to happen on the private property in terms of the plaza. Focusing in just a little bit here in front of the Woodfin Hotel. So what was a 6-foot sidewalk is a entirely reconfigured frontage, which allows for a 12-foot sidewalk, street trees to be planted, entry plaza. This starts to show some of those special paving Sherwin-Williams. This shows the relocated driveway here in order to minimize the number of curb cuts across the sidewalk, and instead allowing that curb cut to happen in this location. We've reconfigured some of the parking in the front, still maintaining majority or the same amount of their existing parking, narrowing up their drive aisle and making some modifications to the curb. The idea of a pedestrian crossing was raised and something that we started taking a look at. I think there's still some feasibility to be worked out, but a couple different locations that may prove feasible. One could be in association with any exit here, and this would actually make a lot of sense because we have driveways in this underpass, we have folks coming across the pedestrian bridge. Could make some sense here. But it also makes some sense in this location. This is a little bit more midway between the two intersections. So these are a couple different options for how things might move forward in terms of adding a pedestrian mid-block crossing. We also looked more specifically I'm just going to keep going here. We also looked more specifically at an idea to bring in parallel parking. If this is a retail environment that starts to develop, perhaps it's a little bit more street front, Main Street kind of a retail environment. On-street parking perhaps could be added. So we tested this out in a pretty interesting configuration that minimizes the amount of setback that we would need. Obviously, if we wanted to add on-street parking, that 8 feet, we have to take it out of the private property. There's nothing within the street that we can claim and change into that other use. So this is more of a hybrid scheme, and I'm going to zoom into this. But it essentially adds the potential for on-street parking to be added from Shellmound Way all the way up to Christie on both sides of the street. And I'm going to go this way. So what this starts to look like, it starts to create these parking pods between street trees. The sidewalk is maintained at 8 feet. You have an 8-foot parking zone here. So instead of a 16-foot wide zone, which is what we'd shown in the overall plan, with an additional 2 feet, we could gain on-street parking. This may be something that a property owner would want to propose as part of their master development. What this starts to look like, it starts to break down something like this, which could be a pretty attractive environment. You start to finish the tree wells out with tree grates. This could be a great opportunity to introduce underground treatments that are beneficial to tree roots. You could introduce stormwater and green street sorts of treatments within these parking pods. There's some drainage patterns that change here. So there's some exciting streetscape opportunities with this sort of a feature. This also just starts to show more enhanced bikeway conditions with painted elements as an option, because we're starting to introduce doors and cars to the street environment. And that wraps up my component. Michelle's going to give a little bit of forward thinking about how this plan goes forward.
Thank you. And I will just wrap up the discussion about how we hope to move forward with the plan. In the medium and long term, which is really what the plan addresses, we want to, as I noted at the beginning, address deficiencies in the pedestrian infrastructure in the project area. It would be applicable to design review applications, so again, we would have to be waiting for development projects to come forward for some of these improvements. However, there are some aspects of it that we think can be implemented through the capital improvement program, which the city will be starting to consider at the end of this year. And those would primarily relate to the sidewalk and landscaping improvements in front of Hyatt House, as well as because Hyatt House is unlikely to have any development project that would create a nexus with the widening of the sidewalk at this point. So it would really be incumbent on the city to pursue that. A pedestrian walkway under the Powell Street overpass, as well as landscaping upgrades, which I had mentioned earlier, which could be funded by the property owners. In the near term, this is actually more, excuse me, I misspoke, more to what had been presented and suggested by TMG at the community meeting, which is to define the area surrounding Powell Street Bridge as a unique destination. Now, this would not involve widening the sidewalks or making any of the major capital investments that are being contemplated by the plan, but what it would do would be to help to start to create that area as a focal point rather than a point that you just rush by. And I think by helping to create that, it will support the retail in the area as well as support the further implementation of the plan and motivate property owners to consider redeveloping their properties once they see that the connections are stronger and it enlivens the area in general. So this would be primarily undertaken through an art program that we think could be done by a council task force that could consist of a couple members of the city council, perhaps the art committee, and property owners and tenants in the area. At the community meeting, TMG indicated that she thought that Denise Pinkston from TMG indicated that it would be great if the property owners would financially contribute to this near-term solution. So again, we think that's something that really can help to support and help to bring this project to implementation in the future. Other near-term actions that we can take throughout the plan, the streetscape section mentions that we will create an amendment to the existing city street furniture catalog, and that can be done in the near term to really start picking out those elements and to help guide future development for them in selecting both what they might want to do if they want to do it to a higher finish, but to create a context. And that's something that we can pursue in the near term if these guidelines are approved. And then the last thing that we want to pursue is evaluating access to Site B through a traffic study. And what this will help us do is it will help us evaluate exactly where we might put that pedestrian crossing, because we'd want it to work with the egress and ingress with the site. We do anticipate the area under Powell Street Bridge, but if they may need something in the mid-block crossing as well, somewhere mid-block between the Powell Street Bridge and Christie, that creates additional opportunities for us to implement that, that pedestrian crossing. And so with that, since I wanted to complete that, the environmental review, this is exempt from CEQA under the general rule. And our next steps are, assuming this is approved by the Planning Commission, that we would want to bring it to the City Council for their review and potential approval in July. So we would like to answer any questions of staff, if there are any at this point. And our recommendation is that you consider this any public testimony that you receive, and that based upon that, our recommendation is that the City Council, that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council that the Shellmound Design Guidelines be adopted, as well as amend the Emeryville Design Guidelines to stipulate that the Shellmound Design Guidelines would take precedent in the event of a conflict. So with that, I'm done and open to questions. So it's sort of looked at as two fronts. One is the concept that was put forth by TMG Partners, which is essentially it would keep the infrastructure the same as it is. The sidewalks and all of that would remain, but pull out the landscaping that's there. It's a little dated, and create something that's a little softer and has a sort of a nicer interface, as well as implement some public art in the area, potentially the painting of the bridge, or if there were other sort of public art schemes that could be done. And that's something that could be done in the near term and could potentially be funded by the property owners. But the major capital improvements that we discussed, the widening of the sidewalk, the changing of the drive aisles, the relocation of the driveway entrance would be medium or long term and probably contemplated as part of the capital improvement program.
And if that widening of the sidewalk, relocating of the drives, that would require traffic study?
Yes. Well, the widening of the sidewalk would not, the way that the sidewalks are being anticipated to be widened would be back into the private property, so the curb line is not anticipated to change. But the relocation
Circulation around the hotel, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Just one quick question.
On page 11, which has a picture of Shellmound Street at Shellmound Way, there is a 6-foot sidewalk on the right and an 8-foot sidewalk on the left. Was there, what, I thought we were going for 8.
Well, the typical, what we hope to achieve throughout the area is a 16-foot wide sidewalk with 8-foot pedestrian clear. However, there are certain constraints in the area. If there are utility boxes or anything that is creating a difficult condition, the minimum is a 12-foot sidewalk with a 6-foot pedestrian clear. But that's only in specific cases where we have constraints, street lights, that sort of thing. Do you have something more to add, Josh?
Action is showing condition in front of the Hyatt where we can't make it any wider than that, or we would be encroaching too much into their parking.
A question concerning Site B. Has that been resolved as to what use Site B will eventually be? I see a seamless relationship between Bay Street Site B, which is Bay Street continuation, and also the underpass.
At this point, Site B has not been, the specific planning for that site has not been set yet. Madison Marquette has been working with planning staff. They've given us a couple of different options, but they haven't settled on one in terms of putting forth an application or formalizing any of their site plans.
Big box type of site, or is it going to be a villagey continuation of Bay Street in character?
We don't know, but it's probably worth noting that with the demise of the redevelopment agency, that site is now the property of the city. We have an exclusive negotiating agreement with Madison Marquette for that site that expires in September, which is only in a few months from now. After that point, it could go to some other developer than Madison Marquette. It's up to the city and the oversight board, I guess, to decide who we're going to sell it to. They don't get to decide what goes there, but that will help to drive the price. I should also point out that whatever goes there is going to have to come to the Planning Commission for approval of a conditional use permit and design review. That, don't hold your breath, though. That's not going to happen next month. Hopefully it'll happen within the next year.
So as far as the uses, potential uses for the underpass, are there any restrictions? Are they temporal uses, or could there be more long-term uses? What are the restrictions for usage underneath the Powell Street overpass?
Well, that's actually public area and its circulation. So I think the uses that John was discussing in here would be sort of temporary market uses, or as public event space if they wanted to, have concerts, that sort of thing. But it wouldn't be a use strictly in the sense of uses for planning purposes. It would be temporary use, but for the most part, it would be used for circulation.
That is technically public right-of-way. It's Powell Street. It's the area under the bridge, where Powell Street on grade used to be, and now there's a bridge over it, but it's still Powell Street public right-of-way. So whatever goes there would be governed by the same regulations that govern anything that happens in a city street. Probably require an encroachment permit or, some kind of a permit from the city. The city owns the property, and we would control what happens there.
Since in a development like in New York City under the Queensboro Bridge, they have a whole gourmet section, food section, consortium of uses underneath that bridge. That's a right-of-way as well, and there are permanent uses there, which are vibrating and beautiful and energizing for that area. Is that something we can't consider? They had the same right-of-way issue.
No, I think that's a legal question for the city.
See a lawyer.
Not sure if he's prepared to answer right now. It's somewhat speculative. That's New York State. This is California. The laws may be different. But typically, you don't grant a land use entitlement, which runs with the land, in perpetuity to something in the public right-of-way. It
Be a
could
ground
be
lease. It would be a ground lease, I'm sure.
something like that. Public rights-of-way in California are governed by, I believe, by the Streets and Highways Code that may say what you can and can't do.
See it as a valuable piece of property which really ties the whole area together, not really as a bifurcation. More, I see a lot of potential in this. And have we considered maybe a competition, a design competition, where we can gather some of the best and brightest and select some of the best solutions for that area?
Very much what we would anticipate for the, certainly for the long-term use of that area. That would be what we've thought of, very much what John said, to really create it instead of something that divides the area, but to create it as a focal point.
And I know that you've proposed some short-term, I guess it's short-term parking in front of the other hotel, which was just a hypothetical because you'd have to get some additional 2 feet from the property owner.
It's unlikely the on-street parking would be in front of the Hyatt Hotel, but it would be along Shellmound along Shellmound between Shellmound Way and Christie, or on the other side of that's on the west side, or on the east side between Powell and Christie, in front of Site B.
But instead of parking, have you given any thought to possibly parkettes or something to bring an outdoor cafe feel to that whole area on both sides?
You know, the way that the parallel parking is being contemplated, it really lends itself that if somebody wanted to convert some of those spaces to a parklet, it would work very well, because the idea is that there would be trees inset, and right now the vision is the parked cars as a buffer between pedestrians and the road, but they're inset, they would be surrounded by landscaping, so it could certainly be an opportunity for that as well.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions. First, I'm just wondering for comparison if you know what the existing sidewalk and kind of pedestrian zone width are at Bay Street?
In the center? Actually,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Say they're about 12 feet
Okay.
from face of door to curb, and in some cases they do widen out. There's some bulb outs and things.
Okay. And then my other question is, so you mentioned on the kind of more detailed plan on the blow up of the area underneath the Powell Street Bridge, there was a driveway to the hotel parking lot that was kind of eliminated onto Shellmound and relocated onto the new driveway under the bridge. And I'm just curious, you mentioned that that was done to kind of eliminate a conflict across the sidewalk on Shellmound. But by doing that, it's kind of created a conflict across that pedestrian area under the bridge. So I was just kind of curious if you considered the trade-offs there, because it seems like in that pedestrian area under the bridge that if you wanted to maintain it as a more usable area, you'd want to eliminate that driveway.
It's a great point where we're just trading the conflict from one place to another. I think to some degree, yes. I think we're also saying that we don't know exactly how the underpass area is going to develop, and so that may factor into it. There's one other factor, though, that I didn't mention, which is we gain additional parking spaces there by closing that driveway that we've lost in other places on the frontage, and we're trying to make this as beneficial to the Hyatt and their operations as possible. And so, that's something that we've strongly considered. You'll see a larger plaza space there opposite their front door, trying to encourage some sort of a walking connection between the sidewalk and their front door. So by gaining this, also just some of the other changes we've made, maybe we might even be gaining a parking space at the end of the day. So that was another key factor.
I'd also like to mention that it's true that you now have another place where cars are crossing a sidewalk under Powell Street as opposed to on Shellmound Street, but if you look at the pedestrian experience between Bay Street and the public market walking along Shellmound Street, it gives you one less driveway to cross. And also, from a traffic perspective, it consolidates 2 driveways on Shellmound Street into one driveway. So you only have one place where cars are coming and going off of Shellmound Street instead of 2 places that are right next to each other.
Any other questions before the,
So have all the
or open
areas,
public hearing?
I'm sorry, been studied for the underground utilities and conflicts, and are those clearly defined here?
We did do a survey of the area back in 2005, but we're mostly contemplating sidewalks, and sidewalks don't create, you can still access underground utilities.
I'm wondering, like, the tree wells, and if like that's really doable, because I think, like, in the general plan, we talk about Christie being a green street, I think.
Well, that really, in terms of the street trees and the plantings area sections, we've tried to be as sensitive as possible to conflicts that may exist, so that in events where there's issues with tree wells, we've indicated that plants in pots or alternative plantings can be considered if putting in trees are too costly. So, although these are, we show them as trees, they're for illustrative purposes in terms of what we hope to put in, but the guidelines themselves have enough flexibility to adapt if there are existing conditions that make the implementation too costly.
I have one other question. In the staff report on the first page, in the background, it talks about the project along Shellmound Street, including IKEA, Hyatt House, Bay Street, Public Market. So I've noticed in the guidelines themselves, so there's no mention whatsoever of Shellmound Street on the west side and south of Christie.
Yeah, so that sentence is just saying there's a lot of stuff on Shellmound Street in general. I probably should have just taken IKEA out, but it's another major retailer. But the guidelines themselves are specific to Christie to 64th. It doesn't actually address the south of Christie.
Is that?
Largely because, in terms of what's happening south of Christie, the development that is certainly on the west side of the street, Bay Street, is not going to be changing anytime soon.
The east side.
East side.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
East side.
East side, yes, sorry. The east side is not going to be changing anytime soon. So really imposing the guidelines on there in the hope that there might be a nexus with the redevelopment is not going, with the redevelopment of those properties is
I'm specifically
unlikely to
talking about the west side, though.
I think
And there is the Courtyard Marriott down there, and I've seen people trying to get from here to there, and it's really tough. And so that seems like an area that needs to be addressed as well.
we could always amend the guidelines to be to encompass a wider area. I think the goal of this was to look at really the concept of it really started was the area around Powell Street Bridge is really unpleasant, and we want to support these two retailers. And so initially we just actually addressed the Powell Street Bridge area, but then we really saw that we needed to make a connection. And the main focus has really been connecting Bay Street and the Public Market project. So, but it can certainly be expanded to the
It'd
south.
be hard, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
If there's no more questions, this is a public hearing, so I'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone wishing to speak on this item? Seeing no one, close the public hearing. Looks like you have a comment.
Oh, just bringing my microphone down. Well, I'd just like to say that it looks like they've incorporated the issues that had been brought up by particularly TMG at the last hearing. And since TMG hasn't shown up here, I presume it's acceptable to them.
We got an email from Denise Pinkston saying she supported these guidelines in their current form.
I have just a couple little comments. On the resolution on page 1, there's a typo,
Uh-oh.
and it's pretty important. Whereas the Emeryville Design Guidelines, I think you mean Shellmound, the second whereas.
No. No, that's referring to the citywide design guidelines,
Yes?
and which are called the Emeryville Design Guidelines. And it's saying that those guidelines allow specific and area plans or, guidelines that are for specific sub-areas of the city to take precedence over the Emeryville Design Guidelines, over the citywide design guidelines. So that's what that's
Okay,
referring to.
well, they both say Emeryville Design Guidelines, so it's taking precedence over itself. That's all. I don't know,
Second whereas, yeah.
yeah.
Well, maybe it's not worded very well, but what it means is the citywide design guidelines provide for specific and area plans that are tailored to the unique areas of the cities and that would take precedence over the citywide design guidelines if there are conflicts. That's what that's trying to say.
Still don't get it, but I believe you. I had a couple other comments, if I may. There's a few little language things, simple little fixes on page 2 of the Shellmound Guidelines. Oh, wait a minute, that's not right. Me, I mislabeled that. No, that's okay. Page 23, I'm sorry. Page 23. There's just the principle is awkwardly stated. It's a little, it could be better, that the public street life shall be supported by the public streetscape. And I had a question on that same page, under guidelines 2.6.1.2, at a district scale, coordinated design, type, color, and material of street furniture contributes, blah, blah, blah. Who's going to oversee the choosing of the public furniture? Would that come before us as different projects are developed, or?
I think that's a next step. I don't know, do you want to speak to that, Michelle?
Of the streetscape furnishings for the Shellmound Design Guidelines, if you go to page 26, the implementation recommendation, which is what I had mentioned, is something that we could do in the near term, is to develop a detailed streetscape furnishings catalog for this area. We could certainly bring it to the Planning Commission. The existing street furniture catalog, I don't believe it was approved by the City Council, but for whatever reason, it didn't come to the Planning Commission. But I certainly see no reason why we couldn't and really should bring it to the Planning Commission in the future. The way that the catalog is set up currently, I believe you received a digital copy of it prior to the meeting, is there's one for the whole city, and there's a subsection currently that addresses the Park Avenue area. And so this would be another subsection that would specifically refer to Shellmound.
I forwarded a link to the street catalog to all of you. Hopefully you all got it.
The old one. Is that
Current one.
current one? Yes. Okay.
Oh, the current one and the 1993
Yeah, okay.
thing, which is a different
Right.
issue.
Right.
Right.
And then I just had a couple little more. On page 25, we need a better picture of a tree grate, because it's actually illustrating the very thing in the text we don't want to do, which is a girdled tree. And on page 30, under the,
Something in here.
at the very top of the page, it talks about trees in the compatibility with the physical conditions of the urban setting, such as limited space for roots, canopies, yada, yada, yada. I would like to also add maybe a little note asking that successful tree species in the area are noted and follow suit, and that sort of ties in with 2.8.1.0, which is 2.8.1.9, which is plant selection. So I think you almost have the language there. And then the last thing is on this page is the shrubs, which is down at 2.8.1.12. It says should be trimmed to 3 feet or less in height, and I would recommend actually citing from the Bay Friendly Guidelines, which we're working towards and on, is to use appropriate species of shrubs that grow to 3 feet or less, and then if they grow higher, that would be maintained to 3 foot, and that would keep down the maintenance cost. And that is, there's a little, yeah, I very much, I'm not really sure about page, let's see, on page 35. Where are we here? I'm just questioning the driveway underneath the overpass that goes into Site B. So I have reservations about that. We just have to see the project as it comes before us, but it does create conflicts, as Commissioner Moss stated, with the pedestrian access under the bridge. And on page 44, which is the enlargement plans, there was a, I got really confused. There's this, it says retail proposed and other development schemes shall front and have primary access from Shellmound Ave. And I was like, oh no, is there a new street that's happening, you know, like Bay Street? But it's just Shellmound Street, I'm guessing. So that was it.
You have comments, John?
Yeah. Starting with the acknowledgements at the beginning, the bottom says redevelopment agency. I'm not sure if that's correct or not, but seems outdated. And then starting off, beginning of chapter 1 overview, kind of a general question on the formatting. I was a little confused how this is going to be put together. I'm assuming it's going to be a spiral bound, double-sided, things facing each other, and maybe that's what I was struggling with a little bit, where the first page, which is a map kind of graphic illustration before chapter 1 overview, I opened the document up and it's like, what is this? And it wasn't really clear as to what that was. And I think, yeah, and I think, you know, just in general terms, what would improve things is if we put better titles on the illustrations. I think the illustrations are really great, but I don't know what context they are. So I think I struggled with that a little bit. Then continuing on, kind of formatting item again, is page numbers. And I'm not sure if my photocopy faded off on the top, because I didn't see consistent page numbers or page numbers, and maybe it's where they're stapled in the corner and I'm just not seeing it. But then going on to page 7, chapter 2, there's a statement that says a walkable district is defined by a high level of safety, a concentration of amenities, and active uses in buildings that reinforce and encourage pedestrian activity along the street corridor. I would like to add one more clause in there after concentration of amenities that says adequate sidewalk widths. And I know that this is what this whole thing is about, but it seems to escape us a lot. And then probably the biggest issue I have with the whole document is that we no longer have a clearly defined number that says, in absolute terms, we want 8-foot sidewalks. And that's really relating to the pedestrian zone that I'm speaking of. We've given a range that says kind of a 6-foot, or a 12-foot to 16-foot, and then we talk about having 50% of the overall width being the pedestrian zone width. So because we've given that range of 12-foot at the low end, I think we've really left an open door to invite a 6-foot sidewalk, which I'm totally opposed to. So what I'd like to see is some sort of a statement that says we are going to have a minimum of 8-foot pedestrian zone. And I think in the case where we're in front of the Hyatt, where we only have 12-foot to play with, I think we still have to make that 8-foot pedestrian zone. To me, the 6-foot just isn't acceptable and isn't workable, especially in a high-traffic area like that. So I think there needs to be wording that accommodates that. And really the exception is that when you have the obstacles like the traffic signals or something that you can't move, that it could narrow down to 6 foot. And I think the wording in there that kind of says that is is pretty decent. Let's see here. Yeah, just general term, for all the illustrations, if we can add some better titles that better describe what's going on there. And
I'm sorry, John, are you referring to the illustrative plans at the end, or the?
these are kind of in the middle of page 11.
Oh, okay, those, okay.
Yeah, typical street sections. And I'm just, it doesn't flow very well. I don't really understand if there's something that better described what this is supposed to be showing me, I think would be helpful. And then just a general term, I saw the term downtown kind of a couple places. I don't really know that downtown is appropriate. It's probably a cut and paste kind of thing. But I would recommend that like we do a search and replace on downtown and maybe put Shellmound District or whatever, something that, because I'm not sure that we really have a downtown. And then Vanessa brought up the conflicts underneath the Powell Street Bridge, and I totally agree with that. I'm really concerned about creating the street there, and I can see how that could definitely bring some life to underneath. But given the size of the columns and where they're situated on the street, to me it almost looks like a literal accident waiting to happen there. I just can't see how that can function, and maybe better traffic studies and something can convince me, but it just looks like a pretty dangerous area for both pedestrians and the cars coming out of there. And one final comment, and that kind of relates to two of the pages at the end, the illustrations. There's a dash line on vision diagram, and it shows, I thought I saw, I'm sorry, I had notes that I thought I had seen it. There's a dash line coming from the transit center, basically, and I thought there was some definition to that line, but what I'd really like to see is that continue and show that somehow the pedestrian path continues through this and makes its way through our new path that was just put in at the south end of the marketplace in front of Urban Outfitters. That shows the connection that eventually wants to get to Christie. And I think that's a really important thing that we have to show a really clear intention of getting from here to there. And those are my comments. But the having a definitive statement of we are going to have 8-foot sidewalks, especially because this document trumps the design guidelines that have the actual numbers in there. I think that's essential, especially for me to approve this plan. I would have to have that in there.
So I'm clear, by 8-foot sidewalks, you mean a minimum 8-foot pedestrian clear?
Correct,
Right,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
What you said, with certain exceptions for signals or something of that sort?
Yeah, there's a clause in there that says, if it's not possible because we've got a traffic signal box or something like that. It's like, it shouldn't, I don't want it to be totally inflexible that prohibits.
Well, can I refer you to section 2.222, page 13, 222. Which refers to that, and let me know if you think that language is not explicit enough.
I think that is where it says, but never less than 6 feet at specific constrained locations such as utility box.
Right.
I think that's great.
Okay.
So, but the overall, I think we really need to have a hard fixed number that says 8 feet is what we want to achieve for our pedestrian zone.
Okay.
I think part of the problem is that there is, on the previous page, Section 222 is talking about the alternative of street parking with an 8-foot pedestrian and 8-foot parking lane, and the previous illustration has a 7.5-foot minimum called out. So that's inconsistent.
And I guess on page 11, there should be a big utility box where it says 6-foot minimum.
Physical obstruction, I guess.
If I understand correctly, I believe what Commissioner Sherman is saying is that where, due to physical constraints, the overall sidewalk width has to be 12 feet, you would still have an 8-foot minimum pedestrian zone, meaning
Correct.
that your, whatever it's called, the frontage zone, the amenity zone would be 4 feet,
Correct.
and there'd be no frontage zone.
Okay.
Well, I find it odd that two of the items on the agenda tonight were on my first meeting 6 years ago. My first study session and the last item. So I've been a part of all of the meetings that you brought us, Michelle. And I don't really have any more comments than what my fellow commissioners have said, other than the underpass driveway that shows two-way could work sort of like between West Elm and Elephant Bar, where there's a pretty wide sidewalk, and then I think you can go in one way there. Is that true? Or you actually can come. That's two-way there. It's probably a lot wider. But maybe if this was looked at it as a one-way, again, we're looking at whatever this development is. If this becomes a huge shopping area, or even a 1 or 2 story multi, what did you call it, Stephen? An urban village. One way in isn't going to work, and one way out, which is really all there is right now at Christie, unless we start sticking aprons in all the way down the road, or even one. So there's going to have to be ways in and out, and this seems to be at least a very good option that's hidden. Maybe it doesn't lend well to the pedestrian crossings, but I'm sure there's a way that maybe that could be a raised area where it slows traffic down and lights come on, and then everyone flows across the street, assuming that Wells Fargo gets built and maybe another restaurant goes in, there's more activity across the street. Hyatt does better than the previous owners, and we get a lot more people going in, and then what TMG is doing down the street. So I don't think that's a bad area to at least have cars passing, and I agree with the consultant that it increases more like literal traffic under there, whether it's pedestrian and car. You want activity under there, because the less activity, the point is it's dark, it's unused. Now we want activity, so maybe one way would work. And that's really my only comment. Otherwise, it's a good document, formatting aside. But maybe we'll see what that looks like in the final.
I'm just assuming that anything that happens with that proposed traffic underneath the bridge would be studied further, because I think there are problems with circulation, with turning into the driveway and the stacking distance and all that kind of stuff. So I'm assuming that if that is looked at further, that there'll be, real serious study done. And, I think it's a nice idea if it can be made to work safely and efficiently in that. My one little addition to this is on page 19, one of my pet things, the parking structures could be lined with ground floor retail. I think it said the parking structures should be lined with ground floor active uses, and whether it's residential or retail, I don't care, but should rather than could, and that's all. That's all I'm going to say about this one. I think we've got a lot of good stuff in here, and that we should move forward.
Yeah, you actually, you took one of my comments with the should instead of, or could instead of should, or You know what I meant. You know what I meant. That last comment I was going to make. So I second that. And I also want to echo what Commissioner Sherman was saying with the about the widths and the minimum. I was a little concerned about the 6-foot minimum as well. So I think that language just needs to be strengthened so that we don't end up with that where it's where it's possible to have wider sidewalks. And then I have 2 other substantial comments and 1 piddly comment. So my piddly comment is that on page 19, planning at the bottom of the page, Planning Commission should be capitalized. And then my other 2 comments are on page. Whoops, now I lost it. It's the part that talks about there it is on page 16. 2.3.2 talks about width proportions and the option for on-street parking. And I was just a little concerned there because I think there's a drastic difference between a essentially attached sidewalk with on-street parking and an essentially detached sidewalk with, with planting and amenities and things between the pedestrian zone and the curb. And so I just would like to see either kind of a minimum ratio, or a maximum ratio of parking that would be allowed. It says right now that basically that zone would serve as a hybrid area for parking and amenities. But I think if that's going to happen, that there should be a maximum ratio of parking to amenities, so that we don't end up with a majority of parking in a zone that's really more intended for pedestrian amenities and public amenities. Either that, or there should just be some additional standards for that condition where there would be on-street parking. I think you want to address that.
Can I clarify something? Do you mean that in terms of the width or along a length of a block?
Along the length of a block.
Okay.
Like, maybe it's 60-40 or something like that. That there would be 40% kind of pedestrian amenities in that zone, or something to that extent.
I think the intent is that that balance happens throughout. There's never a place where it's all parking, no amenity. So is your comment that hybrid should only occur within a certain percentage of a block, so that you would have a full 16-foot normal
Well, no, but that
condition?
if there's going to be a hybrid approach, if there's going to be parking included, that the parking should only occupy so much of that zone for that area where the parking's included. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And then my last comment is just that I was a little disappointed to see that I know this plan only deals with the public right-of-way, but I was a little disappointed to see that it didn't address at all the connection to the Bay Trail through the, Sheraton 4 Points parking lot that connects to Shellmound there. It's just really shown as kind of the existing driveway and the existing condition, and I think that's a really kind of a weak link in the Bay Trail. And I just would have liked to have seen that addressed a little bit more, in that short area where it does touch the public right-of-way.
Maybe we could get a little clarification on that, because that had been something that the plan did address, and it was, my recollection is that was changed when the Bay Trail was determined to follow Christie over to Shellmound, and I'm kind of looking at Charlie because I'm.
Right.
And so I think, there could be an interim condition where we maintain and strengthen the connection through the parking lot adjacent to Powell Street Bridge, and making the connection
Something,
There
because right
was a-
now Christie, part of Christie is only one way, and so you can't, if you're
Well, it
going
would-
north on the Bay Trail, you can't,
However,
It would involve a contraflow bike lane.
okay.
right.
We were contemplating where Christie comes out to Shellmound Street, there's 5 lanes that all go the same direction. It really doesn't need 5 lanes. So there's room there for a contraflow bike lane on one side and a normal flow bike lane on the other side. And I think we were contemplating something like that along Christie to get rid of this funky connection behind the Hyatt. It's true that that is currently the official Bay Trail alignment as far as the Bay Trail people are concerned. So we'd have to go to them and plead with them to change the alignment over to Christie. I believe this was something that came up when we were considering combining the Powell Street Urban Design Guidelines, which, as you know, have been adopted by the City Council some time ago now, with these guidelines, which started earlier but somehow got delayed, into a single overall comprehensive plan for the whole area. Well, that ended up not happening, and I think that was when we were contemplating that we started thinking about what was happening along Christie Avenue there. I'm afraid I guess that's kind of fallen through the cracks now, but that's why it's not reflected in this plan.
Okay, yeah, I mean, even if it ends up being on Christie, I think that even touches this plan area, so I just think that's something that should be addressed in this plan.
The ultimate idea in the general plan is that the Bay Trail would go along a new bike path that would be built parallel to the freeway, just east of the freeway, south of Powell Street, behind the current Powell Street Shopping Center when that area all redevelops. And then it would come out to Shellmound Street just north of Temescal Creek, and then cross Shellmound Street, and then go across the bridge over the railroad tracks if we ever build it, and then down the Greenway. So that's the alignment the general plan calls for someday for the Bay Trail.
So we should address it in its current form. I think it's a good comment.
The problem with it here is you can't turn left on a bicycle going northbound on Shellmound Street into that driveway. Well, I guess you can, but it's not easy. So perhaps that would be something we'd look at if we ever put in this mid-block crosswalk.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that needs to be addressed because it's even more difficult to turn left onto the one-way Christie, so your only option is through the Sheraton parking lot.
Yeah.
Well, we've had a lot of comments here. Is there a motion on this?
With all the changes, assuming staff has taken good notes, I would move to approve the plan as proposed, with the changes.
I'll second
Sending that on to City Council, correct? Yes,
For approval, right, for adoption, yeah.
for adoption.
So, Michelle, are you clear on all their revisions? Good, okay.
Does that include the recommendation that it be expanded to include the west side of Shellmound north of where it
That would
currently
be
is?
every single comment made. I agree with Commissioner Coomerly that, yeah, just that sidewalk, at least the pedestrian realm, is an important part to this plan. It is a lot of accumulation at the Emeryville there and a difficult intersection to cross, but
Where are we talking about?
No, for the west side of Shellmound, south of Christie, the public right-of-way in that
To
area.
how far?
To the bridge. Well, all right, not to the bridge. To
the
where
bus stop?
the sidewalk stops. How's that? To the, at least to
to
the...
meet this plan.
To the Marriott, Courtyard Marriott. And
Well-
if there is another crosswalk further along, then to that.
One thing I should point out is that these guidelines will take precedence over the citywide design guidelines in the area that they cover. In the area they don't cover, and no other special area plan covers, then the citywide design guidelines will take precedent. And the citywide design guidelines in this area, which is regional retail overlay, call for an 18-foot sidewalk. So if the Powell Street Plaza area ever redevelops, it would be subject to the citywide design guidelines along Shellmound Street, and they'd have to do an 18-foot sidewalk, which is more than what these guidelines call for. So you might want to
Right.
consider
Rescind
not
my-
including that
Strike
area.
that.
Ask of that. Never mind.
Anyway,
Thanks, Charlie.
Sure. Happy to help.
so not really amending my motion except to strike that one want.
Is there a second?
I second that.
Okay.
right.
Commissioner Flores moved and Commissioner Cardoza seconded.
On
To
the mo-
recommend with all those adjustments that this be forwarded to the council for its approval.
On the motion, Commissioner Cardoza,
Aye.
Commissioner Kummerly,
Aye.
Commissioner Moss,
Aye.
Commissioner Sherman,
Aye.
Commissioner Steinberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Flores,
Yes.
Chair Donaldson.
Okay.
7 ayes. The resolution's approved to forward this to the City Council with a recommendation for adoption.
I have to recuse myself for this item because I did the first meeting too, because I live within 500 feet at the Bakery Lofts.
Within 500 feet?
I did. And, but since I live there, I can still sit in the audience, and I won't go anywhere because I know we're going somewhere after.
Okay.
Can we take a little break here?
Okay. 5-minute break. 5-minute break. And I would like to thank you for all your patience of sitting through these other items. All right, back in session. Miru, this is your item.